My name is Claire Meredith Mercer. I'm 36 years old. I live in a small, damp row house in northeast Portland, 2 blocks from a bakery that burns cinnamon into the morning air and 1 stoplight away from the river. For the last year I've been living inside a single sentence, a play I wrote to name the years I never stood up for myself. I make my living teaching movement at the community college by day and building sets at night. I am calling this part of my life repair, because that's what it feels like. Stubborn, dangerous, and always just out of true. Before I dive in, if you're into real stories that don't shy away from the heavy stuff, please consider subscribing. Sharing something this private is hard, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. The line that started all of this, the line that sits like a splinter under my skin, was simple and ordinary. She said, "You can watch online." I said, "I'd rather see you from the stage." She is Lydia Shaw, my mother. Not the mythical, softened version people write songs about, but the woman who could make a room fall into silence with a single cracked vowel and then leave the room with a cigarette between 2 fingers and a stack of unpaid bills in her pocket. Lydia sang in bars and on ferry docks. She had a voice that made strangers remember things they didn't know they knew. To the world she was free. To me she was a doorway slammed in the middle of a summer heat wave. If I sound bitter up front, good. But there's also tenderness buried in the bitterness, the kind that leaks out in the quiet hours when the street lamp slices the bedroom in half and the smell of coffee from next door filters in. I have spent most of my life trying to turn that tenderness into something that wouldn't crush me. We begin in the small theater where I labor, a space that smells of dust and paint, of someone else's rehearsal sweat, a moth-eaten couch that takes the shape of the people who fall asleep on it, and a floor of Baltic birch that still holds the grooves where props were dragged in 20 years earlier. The fluorescent bulbs hum like nervous insects above my head. It's where I rehearsed the scene that would bring my mother back into the same room as me. I grew up with a father who measured love in muted roars and a mother who measured it in decibels and distance. My father, David Mercer, worked the night shifts at the grain mill and carried home the kind of silence that leaves fingerprints, rigid, weighty, unavoidable. He told us stories by omission. The things he didn't say shaped us like scaffolding. He taught me to fix things, to keep my hands busy when my heart shook. My mother taught me how to fold the world so that it fit into a single verse. She taught me that presence was optional. She taught me that you could sing and then leave. "You can watch online," she said the afternoon the theater called her to tell her about the run. Her voice was a little thread of blue on the phone. "We're streaming this one. It's perfect for me. Touring." I remember the flutter of that sentence. It was so carefully small, like a bandage over a burn. Assumed convenience. Assumed distance. I had planned to invite her. I practiced how to say it, the way you practice a chorus until the melody becomes muscle. I had written a scene where my character asks for a witness. In the rehearsal that afternoon, my hands were full of loose scripts and coffee rings, and I answered without thinking. "I'd rather see you from the stage," I said. There was a pause long and thin as a piano wire. I wrote those words on the back of a script and kept them. They are blunt teeth. Honest and risky. Seeing someone from the stage isn't a sentence you say lightly. It means you want them to be present in the way that matters, to feel the breath share the same hall, the applause spill toward them, to be visible and accountable. I wasn't asking for a curtain call. I was asking for reckoning. After I said it, she laughed. Not a full laugh, but the small diplomatic sound people use when they want to end the conversation without actually doing it. "Claire, darling. I can't always, you know how this is. I'll watch the stream. I'll watch you slay it online and we'll talk after." Look after. The old promise. The soft exile. That afternoon, the rain had the cold quality of a city that expects the weather to be practical. It came to clear the air but left the damp on your collar. There was a ring of light on my kitchen counter where the sun didn't reach. I stood there and felt something move inside me, like a locked room being opened. If this is resonating so far, a like helps us reach more people who might need this story. I am telling you these things because the theater is not just a place where I make plays. It's where I try to translate my family into language that doesn't kill me. My brother Jonah lives 2 neighborhoods over, and he has a way of looking at a room like it's a ledger. He's practical in the brutal sense. He catalogues injuries and then decides whether they can be sutured or amputated. "She's not coming," he said when I told him about her. "You know the routine. She leaves us, she sings about leaving, and then sometime after that she calls and asks about the cat." Jonah shields his softness with sarcasm. I respect that armor because the things he doesn't say are often the sharpest. The play, the one I wrote about a girl and her absent mother, about a stage and a screen, became my attempt to drag the past into a room where it couldn't be left unread. I wanted the audience to feel the grit, the cigarette smoke in a car, the taste of black coffee in a rehearsal room at 2 a.m, the way a mother's perfume could be both a map and a lie. I wanted them to hear the line she told me casually on the phone and the counter that sprang out of me like a trapdoor. I told myself this story would either be my mercy or my undoing. I couldn't live forever in the groove left by someone else's absence. If you're still with me, thank you. If you want to hear how the night ended, don't forget to subscribe. I promise I'm not asking for applause, only for eyes. Tonight, the stage is a rectangle of possibility, and the words are a ladder I built to climb back onto a body that has been missing for years. I want to be seen. I want my mother to witness what I made of the silence she left behind. Saying, "I'd rather see you from the stage," was the first swing of the pendulum back toward owning my own life. Rehearsals had the same ritualistic cadence as family meals had when I was a child, with a different set of utensils. Blocking notes instead of salt and pepper, quiet amends instead of mumbled apologies. The theater smelled like new paint and coffee that had been reheated too many times. The lights hung like slow suns, incandescent, indifferent. There were 30 chairs in the house and usually 12 people in the audience for our weekly runs. That felt like enough to be dangerous. My process is messy and tactile. I work with voice coaches who make me breathe like a swimmer and with stage managers who tape run marks like mapmakers charting a coastline. We drilled the scene where the character, an obvious stand-in for me, alternates between physical memory and the body of performance. We used household props that belonged to the community. A chipped teacup, a jacket with a missing button, a child's shoe that rocked on its heel like a memory. The sound of someone sharpening pencils backstage could coax me into a memory richer than a year of therapy. Jonah watched one run with the clinical curiosity of someone in forensics. He sat 5 rows back, arms folded, jaw clenched. When we finished, he asked the question I feared. "What are you trying to get from her, Claire?" "What do you mean?" I answered, the stage light lingering in one spot as if auditioning me. He leaned forward. "Is this about her watching online, or about her being present? Are you performing for her or at her?" He had a point. The play was both a plea and a performance. A lot of my life had been caught at that thin point between wanting to be witnessed and wanting to be forgiven. I couldn't have both. My body learned to split the difference. On stage, I taught myself to be the woman who wanted love. Off stage, I built walls high enough to deflect it. We ate dinner after a grisly run-through at a greasy downtown diner with plastic booths and an air that smelled of old onions. The waitress poured coffee into mugs too small and urged us to take it to go. That was where my friend and dramaturg Sarah told me that my play felt dangerously tender. Sarah is what I would be if I had fewer fears and more audacity. She edits sentences the way surgeons ease out tumors. "You're right to make it a public thing," she said. "But don't make it a trap." I wanted it to be a trap. I wanted my mother to walk in and be caught. I wanted her to understand what she had extracted from our family while she chased the next gig. The problem was that traps only work if the prey doesn't know it exists. My mother had always known how to stay a step ahead. She could wrap her decisions in lyric and make disappearance sound like liberation. At night I dreamt the theater filled with white folding chairs. They were all turned away from me, facing a screen. On that screen, my life played in 10-minute clips with commercials for small-town laundromats in between. This is the image that haunted me most. A life mediated. She could be everywhere and therefore nowhere. Watching something through a digital window is sometimes a way of claiming a presence without the risk of being present. One afternoon, 2 weeks before the premiere, I found myself in my mother's old studio in the house that once belonged to them. The house was a damp, patient thing that had absorbed our voices over the years. The attic smelled of mothballs and cedar. I found my mother's guitar case in a corner behind old Christmas decorations, the kind with flossing tinsel that had once been bright and was now a dull halo around forgotten ornaments. I opened the case because I couldn't help myself. Inside, under a layer of sheet music, there was a small pile of letters tied with a ribbon that had gone brown with age. My fingers trembled like someone defusing a bomb. Jonah had always said there was nothing in her hands that was kind to anyone else, but here were paper ghosts that contradicted him. There were bills and a receipt for a bus ticket to Seattle. There were letters, yes, and one of them was addressed to me. It was not the kind of letter someone leaves under a mattress. It was the kind someone leaves because they are ashamed to knock. The handwriting was small and careful, and strangely, it smelled faintly of cigarettes and lemon oil. Two things I always associate with her presence, like perfume and fear. Claire, it began, my name dead center as if it were a compass point. She had written about a night I remembered only as static, when she packed a bag and left the house, leaving a note that said she needed to breathe. She wrote that she had plans to take us with her, that she had called a cab, that she had a suitcase packed in her car, but that David had come home early and blocked the door. She wrote, quietly, about hands and threats she did not name, about a promise she had been forced to keep, that if she left with us, she would be found and we would be scarred in ways she couldn't repair. The letter said, I left because I was afraid. I stayed away because I thought distance was safety. I'm sorry I did not find another way. It was both an explanation and another wound. I read it in the attic as rain ticked at the roof like impatient fingers. I felt the floor under me, the floor that had been there when those events happened, when my mother's strategy for survival was to leave her children, not to stay and fight. The letter didn't absolve her. It didn't erase the nights of watching her silhouette leave. But it did change something that had been a simple story of abandonment into a complicated map of fear and choices. I called Jonah from the attic with the letter in my lap. He drove over like a man moving toward an accident. When I told him, his face undulated between rage and sorrow. Why didn't she tell us? He asked, in the voice of someone who had taken the brunt of a story he couldn't edit. Maybe she didn't think it would help, I said. Maybe she thought it would break us further. That night I slept badly, fingers still smelling faintly of paper and lemon oil. The play had become less of a trap and more of an attempt to understand. It was moving from accusation toward inquiry, and that made it more dangerous. If you've read this far and it resonates with you, feel free to share in the comments. I'm reading everything. There is no neatness to any of it, just layers of human choices that we will never fully tidy. The theater smelled of sweat and the audience's breath, and that was where truths came to be tested. I wanted my mother in the room because I wanted to see what she would do when real people watched me turn our history into light. The week before the premiere, the town started to look like it might support miracles. There were small shifts. The bakery man started baking a new kind of rye. The river walked its banks like a guardian that had forgotten the names of the city kids. The set went up in 3 days and came down in 2 hours afterward, like a conjuring. We ran scenes off book. People whispered lines in corners like teenagers remembering touch. The director, an old friend named Matteo, kept telling me to breathe into the space between words, to let the silence speak as much as the lines. But the silence had its own voice. My mother called twice more. The first call I ignored because I was terrified of the way my voice might break across the phone and give her a map back to my hurt. The second call came while I was finishing a monologue about forgiveness. She said, "You've always been brave, Claire," which is a phrase she must have handed out to herself in private as much as to me. "You can watch online," she offered again, gentle, habitual as a prayer recited to avoid guilt. This time because I had the letter I said nothing. It felt like a small victory to keep a word from being flung into the void. But the truth is that I wanted her there. Not as a reward but as a witness. Not as a judge, but as a holder of the thing that had been pulled away. That weekend we had a last run that felt like a referendum. The house lights were low and the chairs cold. Jonah sat in the shadowed back and clutched his jacket. I had changed the play in small ways after reading the letter. A scene where the mother leaves is less a criminal act and more a desperate, clumsy attempt at survival. I wanted the audience to feel the ache, the caughtness. I wanted them to understand that survival can look like abandonment from the outside. After the run, people stayed. The bar light was warm with people who asked the same questions that people always ask after a show about a family. Is it true? Did you get to her? What will happen next? These questions felt both invasive and necessary. We are a species that asks to know in order to feel less alone. Later, after everyone had left and the soundboard cooled like a slumbering animal, I found myself alone on stage. The emptiness was not a void but a held breath. I could hear the box fan whisper in the wings. I imagined the real audience. Small faces with their private tragedies folded behind their jaws. I imagined my mother walking in late, just like in the old days when she would come home with a handful of coins and the smell of another city on her scarf. Then the call came. "It's Lydia," Matteo said, his voice far away, as if the booth itself had turned into glass. "She says she can't come. She said she'll watch online. Tell her." My throat closed. The words I wanted to say, "Show up," as a demand for flesh to feel the same air, rearranged into a simpler, straighter sentence. Tell her I want her in the room. Tell her I'd rather see her from the stage. It felt like shouting into a canyon. The echo came back a little deformed, and then it was gone. I didn't know if Matteo would pass it along. I didn't know if she would come. I didn't know what it meant to make that bold demand. "I want you here." For all my life, I had built my performance around the possibility that I might be seen. Now I asked, bluntly, for that seeing to be reciprocity. Jonah didn't want her there. He saw danger. "What are you hoping for? A final apology? A song?" he asked. "She will be there to see you, yes, but she will also be there to make a performance out of your pain. She has always done that." "Maybe," I said. "But what if this is different? What if she shows up and it's not for the applause but to finally watch without a screen between us?" We argued in the wings like siblings in the back of a station wagon. He talked about perimeter and perimeter defense. Keep the hurt small so it can't infect the rest. I talked about arenas and exposure. Somewhere in the middle was the truth. There is no inoculation against grief. You either hold it and let it scratch you raw, or you pretend it's a bruise and it turns into a scar that won't stop aching. If this is resonating for you, a like helps small channels tell big truths. I am not building a shrine to anybody. I am trying to see. That night I dreamed of the stage full of people with their faces turned away. My mother was in the room, but she was watching a screen as if a window could keep her from being haunted. The wallpaper of the dream was that same lemon oil smell and cigarette ash. I woke up with tastes of memory in my mouth and a ledger of small, necessary questions. How do you ask someone to be present when their absence is the only way they've survived? Can you demand accountability and still hold the possibility of forgiveness? I had written the line impulsively in the rehearsal booth. "I'd rather see you from the stage." I had meant it as a demand and a bravely tender wish. The word "rather" felt like the hinge on which everything could swing. If she came, everything might collapse into confessions and recriminations. If she didn't, the play might feel like a victory over a ghost. Either way, the night promised consequence. And consequence is the one thing I had spent my whole life avoiding. Premiere night is a sweet ache. The air in Portland was cold enough to sting the nose, and the theater's heater beat against its ribs like a tired drum. The house filled with the leathery scent of coats and umbrellas and the soft rustle of programs. I sat in my dressing room with a sheet mask on my face because ritual makes me less afraid. I touched the inside of my own arm to tell myself I was still a person, not just a performance. Backstage, the ritual is practical and small. Tape marks, a last sip of water, a whispered line. People orbit each other in the dim like planets. Matteo checked in. "You ready?" he asked. I wasn't. I was afraid of being undone in public. But I wanted to be seen by someone whose absence had shaped me into someone else. That wanting was a kind of hunger. I had rehearsed the opening, where the girl says the sentence to an empty room on purpose, until the words were like muscle memory. "You can watch me online," the character's mother says, voice sweet and far. "I'd rather see you from the stage," the girl replies. The audience would know the stakes even before the lights rose. Do not forget to subscribe if you want to hear how this ends, I thought. The thought felt ridiculous and comforting both. We opened the house. People came in with coats still damp from the drizzle. There was a rustle, the low murmur of strangers coming together to witness something fragile. I could hear the scraping of chairs like bones being fitted. On stage, in the first scene, I pretended not to know the woman who had left me. I feigned a conversation with a phantom. The lights sharpened. The first laugh came from that place in the audience that likes to be complicated. The story moved like a tide. Midway through the second act, the character sings a small, half-remembered song, a lullaby my mother used to hum till we'd both try to fall asleep under a kitchen light. I sang it with the whole weight of childhood in my chest and felt as if the notes were making a bridge. At the end of the song, as the applause grew like a storm, I felt something change in the air behind me. A seat cracking, a weight settling into fabric. I turned for a half-breath in character and saw a figure in the aisle light. Lydia. She had come. She was not exactly what I expected. She was taller than I remembered, hair threaded with silver that refracted light into gentle lines. She wore a coat I had seen in photographs from her small tours, a scarf knotted in a way that always seemed theatrical. Her hands were empty. She had come alone. The audience did what audiences do. They leaned forward, a communal intake of breath. My heart lodged somewhere under my sternum and stayed there. The rest of the scene could have been a blur. My mouth shaped the words my character needed to say. But I was aware of her like a second stage direction, presence at the edge of sound. After the first act, I found myself backstage in a whirl of faces. Fans left envelopes with notes in the lobby. Kids said my monologue had made them cry. An old woman told me she recognized the song from her daughter's lullaby. It was all edges and light, Mateo whispered. She sat in the third row, dead center. He sounded wary, like someone who had brought a powder keg into a family room. "Do I want to see her?" asked him. His face had the look of someone trying not to tip scales. "You'll know when it's time." The second act felt like climbing a ladder whose rungs are emotions. I moved through scenes like a person clearing debris from an old house. The scene where my character finally confronts the mother, thinly veiled as a woman who is mid-audition for her own conscience, is the scene I'd written as the fulcrum. The child in me wanted an apology. The adult in me wanted a truth. The writer in me wanted an artful collapse. The audience wanted closure in 25 minutes. Before the scene, in a heartbeat that felt longer than a life, my mother approached the stage door. She was allowed in for a moment with the crew. I saw them whispering like conspirators. There is a specific smell to those seconds. Hot stage lights, a damp scarf, mothball perfume. The stage manager asked, "Do you want to meet her after the show?" It was a gentle way of arranging damage control. "I want her to sit in the house," I told them. "I want her outside of the wings. I want to find her face when I say the line." We went on. The confrontation scene began with a line I wrote to trap myself. The character throws the years at the mother like a fist. "You told us we were better off with distance," she says, voice raw. The mother, 10 yards away in the auditorium, cannot hear her, but she can see the cadence, the body in motion. I watched the row where she sat and tried to read expressions like a script. She had folded into herself and looked small for the first time I had seen in decades. When that last scene landed, there was a long silence. Not the polite, staged breath people take, but an actual quiet as if the entire room had paused to allow a wound to settle. Then the applause came, not fierce but honest. I bowed, not all the way down but enough. I felt hands on my shoulder. An usher said, "She left quietly. She didn't want to meet." I watched the aisle where she'd sat. Her coat was gone, a small vacancy in the third row. It was the same old thing. She could enter, observe, and depart under the protection of not being entangled. I felt as if the center could not hold. I wanted to run after her, grab her collar and make her look at me and see me and name what she'd done, but the house rules prohibited such breakages. After the curtain call, when the glitter had come off, Jonah found me and said simply, "She was here. She watched." His voice had a flattening calm. That alone is something. It was something. But it was not everything. We sipped bad celebratory punch in the lobby while people filed by, complimented, cried. There was a long line of human warmth and pity. My mother had shown up in the obvious way, to witness via her bare eyes rather than a pixelated feed. But the night carried residue. The echo of a woman who could sit in the dark and watch you unclothe your pain, then leave, not touching any of the brokenness with the faintest intention of healing it. Backstage, in the stillness, I found a note tucked under my dressing room mirror. It wasn't signed, but I suspected the handwriting. Small, meticulous. It read, "I watched. I can't yet step into the light. Be brave. L." It was more than I had expected and less than I needed. I folded it like a map and slid it into a pocket I keep reserved for things that might someday be important. I felt a softening that wasn't forgiveness exactly, but a new definition of presence. She had been in the room. She had watched without buffering the experience through a screen. That presence, even partial, was a beginning. If any part of this story is hitting a nerve, please do share. Sometimes the small comments keep us going. In the weeks after opening night, the play ran to houses that were fuller than our tiny company had ever seen. Reviews called it unflinching and brave. People told me afterward that it made them call their own estranged parents. That scared me. My work had become a lever, either to open doors or to pry them off their hinges. My mother called twice more. Once to ask if she could send flowers and once to ask if I would come to a late-night show she was doing at a tiny club on the east side. She asked, "Are you busy?" And the question held something like apology. I went. The club smelled of spilled beer and lemon oil. Her set was 3 songs and then an apology folded in as a punchline between the opener and another tune. After the set, she stayed at the edge of the stage and looked at me. There was no audience between us now. Just a circle of people who had come for music and stayed for the aftermath. She handed me a napkin with a phone number and said, "My doctor. I thought you should know." Her eyes were wet and stubborn. The napkin said, "Neurology Clinic, Dr. Sanders, memory work. You can watch online," she said, helpless as a habit. "I thought maybe. I'd rather see you from the stage," I told her. The sentence had become ours like a small, shared relic. It no longer felt like an accusation. Felt like a boundary. She told me, quietly, then in pieces, that she'd been having trouble with the blank spaces for a few years now. She had been afraid that if she touched our past too heavily she'd collapse under it, and she'd thought the distance would be gentler. She'd lied about things, had told us fewer truths to protect herself. There were other things. Small betrayals wrapped to look like love, the money she'd sent quietly through the years, tickets she'd purchased but never used, a therapy fund she had set up under an assumed name. She'd been trying to preserve us from the man who had frightened her. But in the process she'd become another kind of fright. Listen. Forgiveness is not a single act. It's a series of attempts to recognize complexity in people who hurt you. I wanted to yell at her for the small cruelties. I wanted to tell her that absence had a cost. But more than that, I wanted to understand, to be given a map. She gave me one. It was messy and incomplete. She gave a night she never told us about when she tried to take us, when David had been there and had threatened both her and anyone who would help us leave. She had left because she thought she had no safe route. She had watched us from the edges for years, paying what she could, watching online from motel rooms while touring, because that was how her guilt became a practice. She had been both coward and savior in ways that made my head spin. We didn't fix anything that night. I didn't raise a banner for her. I didn't confer sainthood. We sat in a sticky chair diner and talked like adults who had been children and were trying to negotiate some new treaty. Jonah met us there, and his bulk of anger loosened when he saw how small she had become in the light. We all cried. There is a particular kind of salt to those hours. Not theatrical salt, not something you can edit into a monologue. It is the grease of truth that gets on your fingers. Over the next year, she began to show up in incremental ways. She came to our rehearsals sometimes and sat in the very back with a program and a cup of bad coffee. She listened and then left. She called daily less often and with more honest questions. One afternoon she came in and stayed for the talkback. She held her chair like it was fragile, and when someone asked how she had learned to leave, she answered without artifice. "I thought I was doing my children a favor," she said. I was terrified. The lesson I learned is not tidy. Presence is not binary. It is not that she was absent and then she was present. Rather, she started to inhabit the space between absence and presence. It was a slow migration, like someone learning to cross a bridge rung by rung. I learned to let the line, "I'd rather see you from the stage," be a plea that could also become a boundary. I learned that wanting someone to witness you is not the same as needing them to fix you. I learned that building an audience for your life does not make you small. It can also be a way of claiming your own truth. There are evenings when I hear the lullaby she used to hum and feel the old quickness in my chest. There are mornings when remembering the letter in the attic makes me ache with a pity I didn't have as a younger person. Some wounds knit differently. Some days I remember the smell of lemon oil and cigarette ash with a kind of strange gratitude because it means I knew complexity in someone I loved. If these pages have resonated with you, please tell me. Have you had someone reappear in your life and change the terms of engagement? Share in the comments. Stories like this are messy and ongoing, and sometimes knowing we're not alone makes it easier to keep showing up. The play keeps running, not because it presents a solution but because it creates space. People come and bring their own ghosts, sit in the dark, and let a stranger's confession touch something of their own. I travel to the stage with my history tucked into my jacket pocket like a photograph. Sometimes I bring my mother with me in the very literal way she prefers. She sits in the audience, and we watch each other watch the past being made into spectacle. The final scene of the play is not a reconciliation. It is a rehearsal for life. Two women in a small kitchen, trying to fold grief into something less sharp. There are no fireworks, no miraculous cures. There is, instead, an acceptance of the slow work of presence. She says things in fragments. I say the words I have kept in the dark. We hold the space. The lesson I carry is this. Asking someone to show up is brave, but it is not your job to make them brave. You can write a play, speak your truth, build a stage where you can be seen. But whether the person who hurt you chooses to step into that light is theirs alone. And sometimes, the truest kind of seeing is when you perform for people you've already survived, and for the ones who will one day take your seat in the audience and watch. Not as a corroboration of your pain, but as a recognition that you lived. If you're still here, thank you. If this story landed on an old bruise, be gentle with yourself. Presence takes time. Forgiveness takes longer. But the stage is a place where we practice both.